The
Hey,
fluorescent
it's gonna
lights
be all
inside the
right.
Walmart on
I'm
Quarter G
scared.
hummed
I
the
know
way
you're
they always did. That flat, colorless buzz that made everything look slightly worse than it was. The floors, the clothes on the racks, the faces of the people pushing carts through aisles that smelled like popcorn and rubber, and something chemical that had no name, but every Walmart in America shared. Marin Braden was standing in the clothing section. Back corner, near the fitting rooms where the Saturday crowd thinned out and the overhead speakers played a country song nobody was listening to. She was 14 years old, 5'4", dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that she'd tied that morning with the rubber band because all her hair ties had broken, and she hadn't asked for new ones because asking for things meant conversations, and conversations meant attention, and attention from the wrong person in her house was something she had learned to avoid the way animals learn to avoid open ground. She was holding a shopping basket in front of her body, not because it was heavy, not because she needed both hands. She was holding it the way a person holds a shield when the shield is the only thing between them and the thing they're afraid of, and they know the shield won't stop anything, but they hold it anyway because holding something is better than holding nothing. Grady Prescott was standing over here. He was 35, stocky, shaved head, wearing a mountaineer's hoodie that he wore to every public place because it made him look like a regular guy, a football fan, somebody's neighbor. His hand was on the clothing rack above Marin's head, his arms stretched across the metal bar, his body leaning forward so his face was close to hers. Close enough that she could smell the skull on his breath and the cheap cologne he sprayed on his neck every morning like it made him a different person. He was talking low, the voice he used in public. The voice that sounded calm if you were standing 10 feet away, but up close had edges in it, sharp places where the words bent into something that wasn't words anymore. It was pressure. It was warning. It was the sound of a man reminding a 14-year-old girl what would happen later if she didn't do exactly what he said right now. Marin didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't cry. She stood perfectly still the way she had learned to stand when movement made things worse. The way prey stands when it knows the predator has already seen it and the only chance left is to be so still that the predator loses interest. Except Grady never lost interest. That was the thing about him. He was patient in his cruelty, the way some men are patient with woodwork. He took his time. He enjoyed the process. But Marin wasn't thinking about Grady right now. She was thinking about her brother. Levi was 3 aisles over looking at sneakers. He was 10 years old, small for his age, wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too big that hung off one shoulder because Darla bought clothes for him to grow into, and he hadn't grown into this one yet. He was holding a pair of white Nikes, turning them over in his hands, checking the price tag, with the careful seriousness of a boy who already knew that wanting things and getting things were 2 different categories that rarely overlapped. Marin watched him through the gap between clothing racks. She had always been able to find Levi in any room, any store, any crowd. It was a skill she had developed the way other 14-year-olds develop skills at volleyball or algebra. She could locate her brother by the sound of his breathing, the shuffle of his shoes, the particular way he hummed to himself when he was nervous, a tuneless 3-note pattern that sounded like a bird that had forgotten its own song. He was humming now. That meant he knew, not the details, not the specifics of what was happening 3 aisles away in the fitting room corner, but the feeling, the atmospheric pressure drop that happened in any space Grady occupied when his mood shifted. Levi had learned to read that pressure the way people in tornado country learned to read the sky. Green tint hail, sudden quiet. Get underground. Marin made her decision. She had made this decision before, dozens of times over 2 years. In the kitchen when Grady came home from the bar. In the living room when Grady didn't like what was on TV. In the car when Grady drove too fast and talked too slow and Levi was in the back seat trying to disappear. Every time the decision was the same, and Marin made it the same way without hesitation, without weighing options because there was only one option, and it was the one she had chosen when she was 12 years old, and she would keep choosing it until she didn't have to anymore. Get Levi out first. Always. She looked at Grady. His jaw was set, his eyes flat, his hands still on the rack above her head. He was in the escalation phase. She knew the phases the way a nurse knows the stages of a fever. Phase 1 was the quiet. Phase 2 was the focus when he picked his target and locked on. Phase 3 was contact. They were between 2 and 3 right now in the narrowing space where his voice got lower and his body got closer, and the rest of the world faded out until it was just him and whoever he had decided to punish. He was focused on her, not on Levi. That was the window. Marin turned her head slightly, not toward Grady, away from him, toward the gap in the racks where she could see her brother's shoes, those beat-up gray New Balances that Darla had bought at the Goodwill on Patrick Street. She spoke, not loud, not a shout, a sentence pitched exactly at the frequency she knew would reach Levi and not carry to anyone else. 2 years of practice had made her precise. Levi, run, don't stop. Find someone big. Grady's hand tightened on the rack. He heard her. He always heard her. But he didn't move toward the aisle where Levi was because Levi wasn't the one he wanted to control right now. Levi was 10 small, easily managed later. Marin was the one who looked at him without looking away. Marin was the one who had to be reminded. Through the gap, Marin saw Levi's gray shoes pause, then turn, then move. Fast. The slap of rubber soles on linoleum getting fainter, heading toward the front of the store, toward the doors, toward outside where there were rows and people, and the chance, however small, that someone would see a running boy and wonder why. She watched until she couldn't see his shoes anymore. Then she turned back to Grady and held the shopping basket a little higher and waited for whatever was going to happen, because whatever it was, Levi wasn't here for it, and that was enough. That had always been enough. This was Marin Braden's system, and she had built it herself, and it worked every single time. Not for her, for him. And she had decided 2 years ago that Levi being safe was worth whatever it cost her, and she had never once reconsidered that math. But to understand how a 14-year-old girl ended up standing in a Walmart, holding a shopping basket like body armor, while her little brother ran for his life, you have to go back. 2 years, to the beginning, to the man in the doorway with a toolbox and a smile and a plan that nobody saw coming because nobody was looking. Darla Braden had been doing it alone for 6 years. Single mother, 2 kids. A duplex on the south side of South Charleston, West Virginia, the kind of place where the rent was reasonable because the landlord had given up on the roof and the porch tilted 3 degrees to the left, and the hot water worked on days that started with tea, and sometimes on Saturdays if you turned the knob a specific way that Marin had memorized and taught to Levi because Darla was already at work by the time they needed to shower. Darla worked at the Cracker Barrel on McCorkle Avenue. Waitress, doubles most days because singles didn't cover the electric bill, and the electric bill was the one that scared her most because losing power meant losing heat in winter, and losing heat in winter with 2 kids meant a phone call from someone with a clipboard and a title that started with Child Protective. She was a good mother who was tired all the time. That's the simplest way to say it and the truest. She loved Marin and Levi the way you love oxygen. Completely desperately and so constantly that you forget to notice it until someone threatens to take it away. She braided Marin's hair on Sunday mornings before church. She read to Levi at night, even when she got home at 11 and her feet throbbed and the words blurred because she was reading through one open eye. She packed their lunches with notes inside little folded squares of paper that said things like, "You are the best thing I ever did," and "Have a great day, baby, I love you to the moon." But she was gone. That was the math. 12 hours a day, sometimes 14, and in those hours her children were alone in a duplex with a tilting porch and a door that locked from the inside but not well enough, and the alone was getting bigger. Marin was 12 and starting to wear the expression of a girl who was growing up faster than her body, the expression of someone who had figured out that her mother's absence wasn't neglect but survival, and that understanding didn't make the absence smaller. Then Grady showed up. Darla met him through a coworker, Barb, the shift manager, who had been trying to set Darla up for a year because Barb believed that every problem a single mother had could be solved by adding a man to the equation, which was the kind of math that only works on paper and never survives contact with reality. He came to the duplex to fix the sink. Darla hadn't asked for a handyman. Barb had sent him. He showed up on a Tuesday afternoon with a toolbox and a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper, because Barb had told him Darla didn't drink and the Dr. Pepper was his version of charm. He fixed the sink. He fixed the porch railing. He replaced the smoke detector batteries that Darla had been meaning to replace for 4 months. He talked to Levi about baseball, knew the Mountaineers roster by heart, tossed a football in the yard while Darla watched from the kitchen window and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Stupid, dangerous, irresistible hope. He called Marin Kiddo, took them all to Dairy Queen, helped Levi with his multiplication tables, told Darla she was doing an incredible job and that she deserved someone in her corner. Marin wanted to believe it. She was 12. She wanted a version of her life where her mother smiled more and worked less, and someone else carried the toolbox and fixed the things that broke. She wanted to stop being the second adult in the house. She wanted to be the kid. Grady moved in after 3 months. Darla cried happy tears. Levi high-fived him at the door. Marin helped him carry boxes from his truck, a dented F-150 with West Virginia plates and a Mountaineer sticker on the bumper, and a back seat that smelled like cigarettes even though Grady said he'd quit. The first month was fine. The second month things shifted. Small things. The kind of things that a 12-year-old notices before anyone else, because 12-year-olds are the most accurate emotional barometers on the planet. They don't have the adult skill of rationalizing away what they feel. They just feel it. Grady's voice changed when Darla wasn't home. Not louder, lower. The pitch dropped, the warmth drained out, and what was left was the voice of a man who didn't have to perform anymore because his audience had gone to work. Levi spilled water at dinner. It was a Tuesday. Grady grabbed the glass before it rolled off the table, and his hand closed around Levi's wrist, and he squeezed. Not long, 2 seconds. But Marin saw Levi's face. The surprise, then the pain, then the quick rearrangement into nothing, into blankness, into the face of a boy who had just learned that spilling water had consequences it had never had before. I didn't mean to, Levi said. Clean it up, Grady said, and his hand opened and Levi's wrist had 4 red marks where the fingers had been, and Grady went back to eating like nothing had happened, and Marin sat across the table watching her brother wipe the water with a paper towel, and she felt something cold move through her chest, something that would live there for 2 years, growing, hardening, becoming the thing she built her entire system around. She was 12 years old and she saw it. She saw what was coming. She saw it the way you see weather on a flat horizon a long time before it arrives with nowhere to go. The next incident was a week later. Marin had been watching TV in the living room. Some show she can't remember now because the show doesn't matter. What matters is that she was sitting on the couch and Grady walked in and stood in front of the television and said, "Turn it off," and she said, "It's not even 10 o'clock." And he reached down and grabbed her by the upper arm and pulled her off the couch, and his fingers dug into the soft part above her elbow, and she felt the bruise forming before he let go. She didn't cry, not because she was brave, because something in her brain clicked into a mode she didn't have a name for yet but would later understand was surveillance. She was no longer a girl watching TV. She was a girl watching Grady, learning him, cataloging his patterns, his triggers, his tells. The way his jaw moved when he was agitated, the way his eyes went flat and unfocused right before he did something, the way he smiled afterward, the same smile he had used on Darla, the same smile he had used with the Dr. Pepper and the sink repair and the football in the yard. The smile was the most dangerous part of him, because the smile was what he showed to the world and the world believed it. Why wouldn't they? He was helpful. He worked odd jobs. He went to church with Darla on Sundays and shook the pastor's hand and put money in the plate and said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," and carried grocery bags for old women in parking lots. He was the kind of man who could hurt a child in the kitchen and then walk into the living room and call his own mother and ask about her arthritis in a voice dripping with concern. Marin understood this with a clarity that most adults never reach. She understood that Grady was not a man with a bad temper. He was a man with a mask. The temper was real. The mask was the performance. And the performance was so good that it had fooled Darla, fooled Barb, fooled the pastor, fooled the neighbors. Everyone believed the mask because the mask was easier to believe than the alternative. The alternative meant that a helpful church-going football-tossing man was hurting children behind a door that locked from the inside, but not well enough. So Marin built her system. It started simple. When Grady's mood shifted, when the voice dropped, when the joys set, Marin would find Levi and move him out of the room. Quietly, naturally. "Hey, Levi, let's go play outside. Hey, Levi, come help me with my homework. Hey, Levi, let's ride bikes." Small redirections that looked like a big sister being a big sister, but were actually evacuation procedures executed with the precision of someone who had studied the threat and mapped the exits. The system grew. She developed protocols for every location. At home, Levi's first exit was the back door to the yard, then over the fence to the Purdon's house next door, where Mrs. Purdon was always home and always had cookies and never asked questions that Marin didn't want to answer. In the car, Levi sat behind the passenger seat closest to the right side door, because if Grady stopped the car, Levi could get out on the sidewalk side. At the grocery store, Levi stayed within 3 aisles of the entrance. At church, Levi sat on the end of the pew nearest the center aisle. Every location had a plan. Every plan had one rule: get Levi out first. Always. She taught him without telling him why. She didn't say Grady is dangerous because saying it out loud made it real in a way she wasn't ready for, and because Levi was 10 and he still wanted to believe that the man who had tossed a football with him in the yard was the real one, and the man who grabbed his wrist was the mistake. Marin let him believe that. It was the last piece of his childhood she could protect, and she protected it fiercely. Instead, she gave him rules disguised as games. If I ever say run, you run, no questions. If I say go to Mrs. Purdon's, you go. If you're ever somewhere and you feel scared and I'm not there, you find the biggest person you can. Not the nicest looking, the biggest, because big people are harder to argue with. Why would I be scared? Levi asked. It's just in case, Marin said. Like a fire drill. We practice so we're ready. Levi accepted this. He was 10. Fire drills made sense. He didn't know he was rehearsing for something that had nothing to do with fire. 7 months before the Walmart, Marin tried to get help. She sat in Mrs. Pemberton's office during 6th period. Mrs. Pemberton was the school guidance counselor, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a poster on her wall that said, "This is a safe space," in letters made of puzzle pieces. Marin had stared at that poster for a long time before she spoke because she was trying to decide if it was true or if it was just decoration. She told Mrs. Pemberton about Grady. Not everything. Enough. The grabbing, the bruises, the voice that changed when Darla left. She spoke in the flat, careful tone of someone who had practiced what to say and was delivering it the way you deliver a report in class: organized, factual, emotionless. Because she knew that emotions would make her look hysterical, and hysteria was what people used to dismiss girls who told the truth. Mrs. Pemberton listened, took notes, said she was going to arrange a meeting with the family. Marin's stomach dropped. She had expected a phone call to the police, or at least a call to her mother. Instead, she got a meeting, and the meeting included Grady. He came to the school on a Thursday, wore a button-down shirt, shook Mrs. Pemberton's hand, sat in the chair across from her desk with his ankle on his knee and his hands open in his lap, the posture of a man who had nothing to hide. He looked at Marin with an expression of loving concern that was so perfect, so practiced, so utterly convincing, that Marin felt the ground shift beneath her feet because she realized she was watching an artist at work. This was his masterpiece. This was what he was best at. Not the hitting, the performance after the hitting. Mrs. Pemberton, he said, and his voice was warm, worried, the voice of a man who cared deeply about a troubled child. Marin has been going through a tough time since her dad left. Darla and I have been trying to get her into counseling, but she's resistant. She has a vivid imagination and some behavioral issues that started before I was in the picture. I love these kids like they're my own, and it breaks my heart to hear that she's saying these things, but this isn't the first time she's made up stories for attention. He looked at Marin. The mask smiled. Behind the mask, the real face said, "See, nobody believes you. Nobody will ever believe you, Mrs." Pemberton nodded. She looked at Marin with the expression adults use when they've decided you're the problem, not the person you're reporting. It's a specific look. Part pity, part impatience. Part the subtle satisfaction of having resolved a complicated situation with a simple explanation. The girl is troubled. Case closed. Move on. Marin walked out of that office and sat in the bathroom for 30 minutes. Not crying, thinking. Processing what had just happened with the analytical mind of someone twice her age who had just watched the system fail in real time. She understood now. Words weren't enough. Her word against Grady's was a fight she would lose every time because he was an adult, and she was a child, and he was charming, and she was serious, and the world gave adults the benefit of the doubt and gave children appointments with school counselors who had safe space posters that were just decoration. She needed proof, physical, undeniable, dated proof that existed outside of her own mouth, because her mouth could be discredited, but paper could not. That night, Marin started writing. She took a composition notebook from her school supplies, the black and white marbled kind, with the sewn binding that cost $1 at the Dollar General. She wrote the date at the top of the first page. She wrote what Grady had done that week. Time, location, what happened, what he said, what he did. She wrote it the way she had spoken to Mrs. Pemberton, flat, factual, organized. No emotions, no adjectives, just the record. She wrote an entry every time something happened, sometimes twice a week, sometimes 4 times. She noted the date, she had bruises, and where they were. She noted the exact words Grady used. She noted when Levi was present and when he wasn't. She noted what Grady said afterward, the apologies that weren't apologies, the explanations that were threats wearing the clothing of reason. She kept the notebook under her mattress, but she was smart enough to know that one copy wasn't safe. Grady searched her room. She had found her drawers rearranged twice, her backpack unzipped. When she hadn't unzipped it, her closet shelf disturbed. He was looking for evidence that she was telling people. He was looking for ammunition. So she made a second copy. Every 2 weeks, she took the notebook to school and transcribed the new entries into a second composition notebook that she kept in her hallway locker combination lock, and she was the only person who knew the combination. The locker was the safest place she had. Grady couldn't reach it. Darla didn't know about it. The school counselor had already proven herself useless. The locker was Marin's vault. 7 months of entries, every incident, every date, every word. A 14-year-old girl building a legal case with a dollar notebook in a school locker because every adult in her life had either failed to see or chosen not to look. That Thursday night, the night of the meeting with Mrs. Pemberton, Grady punished Marin. Not for what she had said, for making him drive to the school, for making him put on the button-down shirt, for making him perform. He resented the effort, and he took that resentment out on the girl who had caused it, and afterward, he sat on the couch and called his mother and asked about her arthritis in a voice that could have won an Academy Award. Marin lay in bed with the covers up to her chin and the notebook under her mattress and her brother asleep in the next room, and she made a decision that she would not try to tell another adult until she had enough written down that the paper could speak for her. Because the paper didn't have behavioral issues. The paper didn't have a vivid imagination. The paper just had dates and facts, and dates and facts were harder to argue with than a 14-year-old girl. After that, the system had 2 parts. The protection part, which kept Levi safe, and the documentation part, which would someday, when the time was right, make someone listen. She just didn't know that someday was a Saturday at the Walmart on Corridor G now. 4:15 on a Saturday afternoon, and the Walmart parking lot was a mess. Every row, full carts rolling and the wind trucks double parked near the garden center. The South Charleston sun was cutting through the haze, 78 degrees, the kind of humid warmth that made the asphalt shimmer and the parking lot smell like hot rubber and exhaust. Levi Braden ran through the automatic doors. He ran past the greeter, a man in a blue vest who said no running in the store without looking up from his phone, without asking why a 10-year-old boy was sprinting through the entrance with red eyes and a face that was the color of chalk. No running in the store. That was the response. Not, why are you running, or are you okay, or where are your parents, but the rule, the policy, the script. Levi hit the parking lot at full speed, sneakers slapping asphalt, arms pumping the oversized t-shirt billowing behind him like a flag. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew the rules. Run. Don't stop. Find someone big. The parking lot was a grid of metal and glass. Sedans, SUVs, minivans, shopping carts, families loading trunks, a woman arguing with her kid about ice cream, an old man sitting in a lawn chair in the bed of a pickup, drinking sweet tea from a thermos. Levi's eyes scanned the rows the way Marin had taught him. Not the nicest looking, the biggest, because big people are harder to argue with. He saw it. 3rd row from the garden center, a lifted Chevy Silverado, black mud on the wheel wells, lumber stacked in the bed. The biggest thing in the parking lot. Levi ran to it, ducked behind the rear passenger tire, pressed himself against the wheel well, wrapped his arms around his knees and made himself as small as a 10-year-old boy can make himself, which is very small when the alternative is being found. He was shaking, not from cold, from something else, From the thing that happens to a child's body when the adrenaline is still pumping, but the running is over and there's nothing left to do but hide and shake and breathe and try not to make noise. Flint Hargrove was loading 2x4s into the bed of his truck when he heard it. Not talking, not crying, breathing. Fast, ragged, the kind of breathing that comes from running hard and then trying to be silent, and those two things don't go together. And the sound they make when they collide is one of the most recognizable sounds in the world. If you've ever been in a situation where being quiet was the difference between being found and not being found, Flint had been in that situation multiple times, in places where the stakes were higher than a Walmart parking lot, but the breathing sounded exactly the same. He was 45 years old, 6'3", 230 pounds of contractor muscle and military training. Dark beard with gray coming in at the drum, forearms sleeved in ink from the wrists to the elbows, the kind of tattoos that told a story if you knew how to read them. And most people didn't, so they just saw a big man with dark arms and kept their distance. He had spent 8 years in the United States Army, 2 tours with the Ranger Battalion, the kind of service that changes the way you see the world. The Army taught him how to clear a building, how to read a threat, how to assess a situation in under 3 seconds, and decide on a course of action before most people had finished processing what they were looking at. He had carried those skills into civilian life the way some men carry a limp or a scar. Quietly, permanently, but always there. He had been building houses in Kanawha County for 18 years. General contractor, his own company, just him and a couple of subcontractors he trusted. Good work, honest bids, the kind of reputation that came from showing up every day and doing what you said you would do. He rode as road captain for the Elk River Iron MC, a 16-member club out of the Charleston area. Not a 1%er club, not outlaw. A brotherhood of working men who rode together on weekends and did community events and gave each other grief about everything and showed up for each other when it mattered. Kedge Tully ran the club. Plumber, lived 10 minutes away, built like a fire hydrant and about as movable. Then there was Briggs, who worked at the chemical plant across the river, and Rowan from Sissonville, who ran a body shop and had a laugh you could hear from 3 blocks away. Flint was the quiet one, the one who didn't talk unless he had something to say. The one who looked like he could fold a car door in half, but called his 7-year-old daughter Nora every night at bedtime in a voice so gentle his club brothers never let him hear the end of it. He set the 2x4s on the tailgate, walked to the back of the truck, looked down. A boy, dark blonde hair, dirty jeans, a t-shirt hanging off one shoulder, pressed against the wheel while arms around his knees shaking. Eyes red, past crying. In that phase after crying where the body shuts everything down except the part that keeps you hidden, Flint didn't crouch, didn't crowd the kid, just stood there, hands visible, open, the way you stand when you want someone to know you're not a threat. Hey, you okay? The boy looked up. She told me to run, so I ran. Your truck was the biggest thing I could hide behind. The words hit Flint the way certain words hit you when they come from a child. Not in the head, in the chest, in the place where logic doesn't operate and instinct does. Who told you to run, my sister? Marin. She's still inside with Grady. Who's Grady? My mom's boyfriend. 3 words, flat, factual, the way you say the name of something you've been living for so long that you don't have emotions about it anymore, just information. Levi had explained this before. To no one who listened, the explaining had become its own kind of exhaustion. She told me to go. She said, run and don't stop and find someone big. So I ran. What's your name, Levi? Levi Braden. I'm 10. Levi, where's your mom? Working. She works at the Cracker Barrel on McCorkle. She gets off at 6. Grady was supposed to take us shopping for school clothes. He was in a bad mood when he picked us up. He's always in a bad mood. The boy paused, swallowed. He was being rough with Marin in the store, grabbing her arm. She kept pulling away, and he kept grabbing harder. Nobody said anything. Nobody in the whole store said anything. People just walked past like they didn't see it. Flint felt his jaw tighten. The muscles in his neck corded. He recognized the feeling. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something more functional. The operational switch that flips when you've identified a threat and your body starts routing power away from emotion and toward action. How old is Marin? 14. And she told you to run. She always tells me to run. When things get bad, she tells me to go. She puts herself between me and Grady, and she tells me to go somewhere safe. She's been doing it since Grady moved in. That was 2 years ago. The boy looked at his hands. Small hands, dirty fingernails. The hands of a kid who had been playing outside earlier today before a man picked him up for school shopping, and the day turned into something else. She's been protecting me for 2 years, and nobody protects her. Flint pulled out his phone. His hands were steady. They had been steady in Helmand Province when things were considerably worse than a Walmart parking lot, and they were steady now because the thing about training is that it doesn't leave. It lives in the muscle and the nerve in the bone, and when the moment comes, the body remembers what the mind has practiced. Levi, I'm going to call 911. Then I'm going to go inside and find your sister. You're going to stay right here by my truck. Can you do that? He's going to say, I'm lying. Levi said it fast, urgent, the words tumbling. He does that. He tells people I have anger problems and I make things up. He's really good at it. He smiles and he talks like a normal person, and then when we get home, Levi, firm but gentle. The voice Flint used when Nora was spiraling, when the feelings were too big for the body and the words couldn't keep up. I don't care what he says. I care what you're telling me, and I believe you. The boy's chin trembled, not because he was scared. He was past scared. The tremble came from somewhere deeper, from the place where a 10-year-old boy had been carrying the knowledge that his sister was absorbing blows meant for him, and no one in the world seemed to care. And now, in a Walmart parking lot behind the tire of a stranger's truck, a man had said the 4 words he had been waiting 2 years to hear. You believe me. Yeah, kid, I believe you. Flint dialed 911 as he walked toward the entrance. He gave the dispatcher everything he had. The Walmart on Corridor G. A 10-year-old boy. A 14-year-old sister inside with the mother's boyfriend. The boyfriend being physically rough. His name was Grady. The boy's name was Levi Braden. The sister was Marin. He was going in. Sir, I'd advise you to wait for... There's a 14-year-old girl in there with a man who's hurting her. I'm not waiting, he texted the Elk River Iron Grove chat while he walked through the automatic doors. Walmart Corridor G. Kid hiding behind my truck says his sister is inside with an abusive boyfriend of the mother. Need eyes in the parking lot with the boy. Anyone close, Kedge responded first. Rolling. Then Briggs from across the river. 15 minutes. Then Rowan from Sissonville. On my way. Flint moved through the Saturday crowd. Packed aisles. Families. The rumble of carts and overhead music and the beeping of self-checkout registers. He moved the way he'd been trained to clear a building. Systematic, methodical, checking each aisle without rushing. His size drew glances. It always did. A 6'3" man in a leather vest with ink on his arms walking through a Walmart like he was looking for someone. People moved out of his way without being asked. He found them in the clothing section, back corner, near the fitting rooms. Grady was standing over Marin, hand on the rack above her head, leaning in. The girl had her back to a rack of clearance jackets the shopping basket held in front of her body, and the look on her face was the look Flint had seen in places he didn't talk about at cookouts. The look of someone who has accepted that pain is coming and has stopped trying to prevent it and is now just trying to manage it. 14 years old, and she had the face of someone who had been managing pain for longer than most adults could imagine. Flint walked up. Not fast, not aggressive. A man walking down an aisle with empty hands and a calm that had been forged in places where calm was a survival skill. Everything all right here? Grady straightened up, turned, saw Flint. The size, the beard, the tattoos, the vest. Did the math, adjusted. We're fine, man, just shopping. The smile. Levi had described it perfectly. Easy, friendly. The mask, the performance. Flint could see it now, the way the smile sat on Grady's face, like something placed there rather than something that grew there. It was a tool, not an expression. And the man wielding it had used it 1,000 times, and it had worked every single time. Every time except this one. Wasn't asking you. Flint looked past Grady, looked at Marin. The girl's eyes widened. She didn't know this man. She didn't know how he knew her name. She looked from Flint to Grady and back, and her lips moved, but nothing came out. Grady's smile tightened. How do you know her name? Your boy told me. He's not my... Grady caught himself. Recalculated. The smile reset. Levi's outside. He wanders off. He's got behavioral issues. I'll go get him. No, you won't. Excuse me. You're going to stay right here. Levi is safe. He's in the parking lot. He told me what's been happening. And I called the police. They're on their way. The mask dropped. Not all at once, it crumbled. The friendly smile went first, then the easy posture, then the reasonable voice. What was left underneath was a man who had lost control of the narrative. And the only tools he had were the tools he used on children, and those tools did not work on a 6'3" Army Ranger in a leather vest who had already decided how this was going to go. You don't know what you're talking about. Those kids lie about everything. Their mother isn't here, you are. They are. And a 10-year-old boy is shaking behind my truck because his sister told him to run from you. That's all I need to know. Grady looked at the aisle, looked at the fitting room hallway, looked at the exit sign above the back of the store. Flint recognized the look. He had seen it before. The look of a man calculating his options and finding only one. Don't, Flint said. Grady ran, not toward Flint, toward the back of the store past the fitting rooms, toward the emergency exit by the loading dock. Flint didn't chase him. He stayed with Marin, because the girl was still standing against that clothing rack with the shopping basket in front of her body. She hadn't moved. She wasn't going to move until someone told her it was safe. And even then she might not move because safe was a word that had been emptied of meaning in her life. Adults had told her things were safe before. Mrs. Pemberton's office was supposed to be safe. The duplex was supposed to be safe. None of it was safe. All of it was performance. Marin, my name is Flint. Your brother Levi is outside by my truck. He's safe. He told me to find you. The police are coming. The police. Grady just ran. He's gone. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there holding the basket, looking at Flint with the expression of a girl who was trying to determine if this was real or if this was another situation where an adult said the right words and then nothing changed. She had been here before, in Mrs. Pemberton's office, with the safe space poster, with the words that sounded right but led nowhere. Is Levi really okay? He's really okay. He's sitting behind my truck. My guys from the club are on their way to stay with him. He's safe, Marin. She studied his face. Not the way a child studies an adult. The way a person studies a contract. Looking for the fine print. Looking for the clause that would undo everything. Then something in her face changed. Not a collapse, not relief. Something smaller. A loosening. A fraction of the tension leaving the muscles around her eyes. The muscles that had been holding her face together for 2 years. She set the basket down, carefully, like it mattered, like everything had to be done carefully because careful was how she had survived. She set it on the floor next to the clearance rack, and she stood there with her arms at her sides, and then her arms started shaking, and she sat down on the floor between the clearance jackets and the shelf of folded jeans, and she put her face in her hands. Flint didn't touch her, didn't try to comfort her. He sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the opposite shelf, his knees up because the aisle was narrow and he was too big for the space. His boots nearly touched her shoes. The linoleum was cold and slightly sticky. The overhead light buzzed, and he just sat there, present, not pushing, not asking questions, not trying to fix anything. Just the biggest, most heavily tattooed man in the Walmart sitting on the floor of the clearance section, waiting for a 14-year-old girl to feel safe enough to breathe, because that's what she needed. Not a rescue, not a speech, not a plan. She needed 60 seconds where nothing was expected of her, where no one was grabbing her arm or asking her to be brave or telling her to stand still or demanding that she explain. She needed to sit on a cold floor and put her face in her hands and let the shaking move through her body and out the other side. And Flint gave her that. Because the Army had taught him a lot of things, but the most important one was this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone is stay in the room and say nothing, and let them feel what they need to feel without turning it into something about you. A Walmart associate appeared at the end of the aisle. A young woman, maybe 20, blue vest name tag, the look of someone who had been told something was happening in clearance and didn't know what. Sir is everything. Police are coming. Can you make sure nobody comes down this aisle? Yes. Okay. Two South Charleston police officers arrived 6 minutes later. By then, Kedge was already in the parking lot with Levi standing next to Flint's truck, thick arms crossed, the boy sitting on the tailgate now, instead of hiding behind the tire. Briggs rolled in 3 minutes after that. Then Rowan. By the time the officers entered the store, there were three bikers in the parking lot with Levi, and the boy had stopped shaking. Kedge had bought him a bag of Doritos from the vending machine near the garden center entrance. Levi ate them slowly, one chip at a time, sitting on the tailgate of Flint's truck, his feet dangling, looking at the three large men standing around him like a wall. Not a wall to keep him in, a wall to keep everything else out. He looked at Kedge, looked at Briggs, looked at Rowan, three men with beards and tattoos and leather and bikes and the kind of presence that takes up space in a parking lot. The kind of men that other people give a wide berth. The kind of men that a 10-year-old boy had been taught to find. Find the biggest person you can. Big people are harder to argue with. His sister had told him that. She had been 12 when she said it. She had figured out at 12 that the world responds to dialogue and presence, and that a child's voice, no matter how truthful, is easy to dismiss unless there is someone large and undeniable standing behind it. She was 14 now, sitting on the floor of the Walmart clearance section with her face in her hands, and for the first time in 2 years, there was someone large and undeniable sitting across from her. Not saving her, not telling her what to do, just sitting there, letting her breathe. The police found them there. Two officers, one male, one female. They stood at the end of the aisle and saw a girl sitting on the floor and a man the size of a defensive lineman sitting across from her, in the aisle quiet and still, and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Marin looked up when the officers spoke. She looked at them the way she had looked at Flint, assessing, measuring, deciding whether these were adults who would listen or adults who would nod and schedule a meeting. And then she started talking, not all at once, not in a flood, in a steady, measured stream, the way water comes through a crack in a dam, controlled and precise, because the girl had spent 2 years learning to control everything about herself, even the way she told the truth. She spoke in the same flat, factual tone she had used with Mrs. Pemberton, but this time there was something different behind it. This time there was a man the size of a truck sitting 3 feet away who had believed a 10-year-old boy in a parking lot without asking for proof, and that changed the equation. That changed everything. She told them about Grady. 2 years, the escalation, the moods, the system she built for Levi, the meeting with Mrs. Pemberton where Grady's mask worked perfectly, and the counselor chose the smile over the truth. The notebook under the mattress, the second copy in the school locker. She told them about today. Grady picked them up. Bad mood. Got worse in the store. She read the signals, knew it was escalating, made the call, told Levi to run, stayed behind. I told Levi to run today because Grady was getting worse and we were in a public place, and I thought if Levi was outside, at least he'd be safe. I didn't have a plan for me. I just had a plan for him. You've been doing that a long time, the female officer said. Since I was 12. 2 years. Every time it happened, I made sure Levi was somewhere else first. That was my only rule. Get Levi out. Then deal with whatever happens. 14 years old. And her only rule for 2 years had been to save her brother first. Flint was still sitting on the floor when Marin finished talking. He hadn't moved, hadn't interrupted. He had just been there, a presence in the periphery, solid and silent. The kind of presence that says, I'm not going anywhere without using words. The female officer helped Marin stand. The girl's legs were stiff from sitting on the cold linoleum. She rose carefully the way she did everything. Carefully, because careful was the only mode she had. Flint stood too. His knees popped. He was too old to sit on Walmart floors, but he would do it again tomorrow if a kid needed him to. He walked behind Marin as the officers led her toward the front of the store, maintaining distance, not crowding, just present. The biggest man in the building following a 14-year-old girl through the Saturday crowd like an escort, like a shadow, like the thing that stands between a person and whatever might be waiting around the next corner. The automatic doors opened. The afternoon sun hit Marin's face. She stopped, stood in the entrance, looked out at the parking lot. She saw the police cars. She saw the motorcycles. 3 of them parked in a row near Flint's truck, chrome catching the sun. She saw Levi, sitting on the tailgate, between Kedge and Briggs, eating Doritos, not shaking, not hiding, just sitting there, feet dangling, looking like a kid. Just a kid. Not a kid running from something. Just a kid on a tailgate with a bag of chips and two large men standing guard like they had nowhere else in the world to be. Marin stood in the Walmart entrance and looked at her brother and something in her chest that had been locked for 2 years, something she had sealed shut and reinforced and built walls around because opening it would have made her unable to function, cracked. Just a fraction. Just enough. And she stood there in the automatic doorway between the fluorescent inside and the sunlit outside, between the store where she had been trapped and the parking lot where her brother was free, and she let the crack exist without trying to close it. Because for the first time in 2 years, someone big had believed her brother, and someone big had come inside for her. And the system she had built, the system that was only supposed to protect Levi, had accidentally, impossibly, finally protected her too. Not because she had planned it, she had never had a plan for herself. But Levi had run, and he had found the biggest thing in the parking lot. And the biggest thing in the parking lot had a voice like gravel and a heart that broke exactly once that afternoon when a 10-year-old boy said the word she and started shaking. Because she wasn't a stranger. She was his sister. And the reason she told him to run was because she couldn't. The South Charleston Police Dispatch logged the call at 4:22 p.m. 2 units were sent to the Walmart on Corridor G. The first arrived at 4:28, the second at 4:31. By the time both units were on scene, Grady Prescott had been gone for 9 minutes, out the emergency exit by the loading dock, across the back parking lot, past the dumpsters and the pallets of shrink-wrapped merchandise, and the employee smoking area where 3 Walmart associates on break watched a man in a mountaineer's hoodie sprint past them without a word. None of them called anyone. None of them asked why a grown man was running out the emergency exit of a Walmart on a Saturday afternoon like the building was on fire. They watched him go the way people watch things go, with mild curiosity and the decision made in under 2 seconds that whatever was happening was not their problem. This is the thing about emergencies. They don't announce themselves with sirens and flashing lights. They announce themselves with small details that most people file under "not my business" and move on. A boy running through a store, a man running out of one, a girl standing perfectly still in a clothing section with a shopping basket held against her chest like a shield. These are the signals, and the signals are only useful if someone decides to read them. On Corridor G, the signals were loud. They had been loud all afternoon, and the only person who had read them was a 10-year-old boy crouched behind a tire because his 14-year-old sister had taught him how. Inside the Walmart, the female officer, whose name was Sergeant Dana Kessler, was sitting with Marin in the fitting room area. They had moved there from the clearance aisle because the aisle was a public space and Marin's story was not a public thing. The fitting room hallway was narrow and quiet, with beige carpet and mirrors on both walls, and a bench meant for people waiting to try on clothes. Marin sat on the bench. Her hands were in her lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles white. She was still doing the thing she did. The careful thing, the controlled thing. Every word measured, every sentence structured, every emotion held at arm's length. Because she had learned that emotion made adults uncomfortable, and uncomfortable adults stopped listening. Sergeant Kessler was listening. She was a woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and a calm that came from 15 years of patrol in a county where calm was a professional requirement. She had a daughter the same age as Marin. She was thinking about that daughter now, the way you think about your own child, when another child is telling you something that makes the world feel like a place you need to protect your kid from more than you already are. Marin Kessler said, "Do you know where Grady might have gone? He'll go somewhere with reception. He needs to call my mom before she hears it from someone else." That's what he does. He gets ahead of the story. He's always the first person to explain what happened, because if he explains it first, his version becomes the real one. Kessler looked at her. Most 14-year-olds don't talk about narrative control. Most adults don't either. But Marin had spent 2 years living inside the narrative of a man who was better at storytelling than anyone she knew. And she had learned the hard way that the person who tells the story first is the person who gets believed. She was right. At 4:34 p.m., 12 minutes after leaving the Walmart, Grady Prescott called Darla Braden at the Cracker Barrel on McCorkle Avenue. Darla was in the middle of a six-top carrying a tray of chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes and gravy boats, and the kind of sweet tea that comes in glasses big enough to swim in. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She saw the name. Grady. She set the tray down on the table, told the family she'd be right back, and stepped into the hallway between the kitchen and the gift shop where the noise was lower and the air smelled like maple syrup and old wood. "Hey, everything okay?" His voice was calm. That was the first thing she noticed. Not panicked, not angry, not the voice of a man who had just run through a loading dock and across a parking lot. Calm, measured, reasonable. "Listen, there was a situation at the Walmart. The kids were acting up, and some biker guy got involved and made it into a whole thing. He called the case. I left because the guy was getting aggressive and I didn't want to escalate it. You might get a call from the police. If you do, just tell them it was a misunderstanding." "The kids are fine. You know how Marin gets." Darla stood in the hallway, the maple and wood smell pressed against her. Through the swinging door, she could hear the kitchen, the clatter of plates, and the sizzle of grills and the Spanish and English of the cooks overlapping. Normal sounds. The sounds of a Saturday shift at a restaurant where she had worked for 3 years, where the tips were decent, and the manager let her take home food on slow nights, and the work was honest and exhausting and hers. "Marin gets how," she said. "What you said, you know how Marin gets. Gets how, Grady." A pause. The length of the pause told her more than any words could have. Grady was recalculating. She could almost hear it, the gears shifting, the story adjusting. He was good at this. He was the best she had ever known at this. But something in that pause, something in the half-second of silence before his voice came back smooth and reassuring, landed differently than it had before. "She just gets dramatic sometimes. You know that. She gets ideas in her head and where are the kids right now?" "They're at the Walmart. The cops are there. It's being handled. I just need you to call and tell them. You left my kids at a Walmart with the police and you're calling me to ask me to fix it." "Darla, calm down. It's not. Where are you?" Another pause. Longer this time. She heard traffic in the background. He was outside somewhere, walking, or standing at a gas station, or sitting in someone's car. He was somewhere that wasn't the Walmart, somewhere that wasn't with her children, and he was asking her to make a phone call that would make his version of the story the real one. Something happened in Darla's chest. Not a breaking, a clicking, like a combination lock that had been turned to the wrong numbers for 2 years, and suddenly in the hallway of a Cracker Barrel that smelled like maple syrup, the numbers lined up and the lock opened, and what was inside was not anger or sadness, but clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives all at once and changes the shape of everything that came before it. She didn't call the police. She untied her apron, stuffed it in her back pocket, told Barb she had a family emergency, and walked out of the Cracker Barrel with her name tag still on and her car keys already in her hand. The drive from the Cracker Barrel to the Walmart on Corridor G was 11 minutes. Darla made it in 8. She pulled into the parking lot at 5:45 p.m., and the first thing she saw was the police cars. 2 of them parked at angles near the garden center entrance, lights off, but present the way police cars sit when the emergency is over, but the paperwork isn't. The second thing she saw was the motorcycles. 3 of them parked in a row next to a black Chevy Silverado Chrome, catching the late afternoon sun. Big bikes. The kind of machines that take up space and make noise and belong to men who don't apologize for either. Her hands gripped the steering wheel. She felt the vinyl creak under her fingers. She felt the air conditioning blowing on her face and the seatbelt pressing against her chest, and the weight of the last 8 minutes, the drive from the Cracker Barrel, the phone call from Grady, the clicking sound in her chest that had rearranged everything. She saw Levi. He was sitting on the tailgate of the black truck between 2 men. One was thick and barrel-shaped with a red beard and arms crossed over his chest like a bouncer at a door that nobody was getting through. The other was leaner, darker, sitting on a motorcycle next to the truck with his helmet resting on the gas tank. A third man stood nearby, tall-bearded, laughing at something Levi had said. Levi was eating Doritos. His feet were dangling off the tailgate. His gray New Balances, the Goodwill ones, hung 6 inches above the asphalt. He looked small between the 2 men. Not scared small, safe small, the small of a boy who had found the wall he'd been looking for and was sitting behind it. He looked up when her car pulled in. He slid off the tailgate. The Doritos bag stayed on the truck bed. He walked toward her. Not running, walking. The walk of a kid who was done being scared and was now just tired and wanted his mother. His hands were at his sides. His face was calm. The shaking was gone. Whatever had been vibrating through his body behind the tire of that truck had worked its way out somewhere between the Doritos and the bikers and the simple, enormous fact that someone had believed him. Darla was out of the car before she knew she was moving, down on one knee on the asphalt. The parking lot surface was warm and rough through her black work pants. The sun was behind Levi, turning his dark blonde hair into a bright outline, and she couldn't see his face clearly because her eyes were doing the thing eyes do when the information coming in is too much for the system to process. Levi. Baby, are you okay? I'm okay, Mom. He walked into her arms. She held him. The parking lot asphalt dug into her knee. The afternoon sun cut between the parked cars in long orange slats. A shopping cart rolled past them, pushed by. Nobody carried by the wind, and the wheels squeaked in a rhythm that sounded like something counting down. The big guy believed me, Mom. The big guy with the truck. He believed me, and he went inside and got Marin. Darla's arms tightened around her son. Her eyes were open, looking over his shoulder at the Walmart entrance, at the automatic doors that opened and closed as Saturday shoppers moved in and out, oblivious, carrying bags and pushing carts, and living inside the version of the world where a trip to Walmart was just a trip to Walmart. Where's Marin inside with the police? And then Levi said the words that undid her. Mom, Grady was hurting her. He's been hurting her. She didn't tell you because, I didn't tell you because, he said I know, baby, I know. She said it before he could finish. She said it because he didn't need to finish. She said it because the clicking sound in her chest had opened a door, and behind the door was every small thing she had not seen, every signal she had not read, every moment in the last 2 years when something felt wrong, and she told herself it was stress or imagination or the natural friction of blending a family. Every Tuesday night when Marin was quieter than usual, every morning when Levi's eyes tracked Grady across the kitchen the way a bird tracks a cat, every Sunday when Grady smiled at the pastor and shook hands and put money in the plate, and she thought, this is a good man. This is a man who cares. This is the help I've been praying for. I know, baby, I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. She held him on the parking lot asphalt with the late afternoon sun cutting between the parked cars, and she felt the 2 years collapse inside her like a building, falling floor by floor, each floor a day. She had gone to work, believing her children were safe, and come home, believing her children were fine and fallen asleep, believing that the man in her house was the man he showed the world. She had been wrong. She had been wrong for 730 days, and every one of those days, her daughter had been standing between her son and a man who hurt children, and her daughter had not told her because her daughter had tried to tell someone else, and that someone else had believed the man instead of the girl, and after that, her daughter had stopped trusting adults to do the thing adults were supposed to do. The police officer who brought Marin out was Sergeant Kessler. She walked beside Marin through the store, past the registers, past the greeter who said, "Have a nice day," like an automated response through the automatic doors and into the late afternoon light. Marin stopped. She stood in the Walmart entrance and looked at the parking lot. She saw her mother on the asphalt holding Levi. She saw the bikers. She saw Flint standing by his truck, big arms at his sides, watching. She saw the police cars and the motorcycles and the shopping carts and the families loading trunks and the whole ordinary machinery of a Saturday afternoon that had for her become something extraordinary. She stood perfectly still. The same stillness she'd had in the clothing section. The same careful, controlled stillness that was not calm, but was the thing she had built to look like calm, because real calm was something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Then Levi looked up from his mother's arms, turned his head, saw his sister in the doorway. "Marin, come here." The simplest sentence, 3 syllables, spoken by a 10-year-old boy who had been told to run and had found help and was now standing in his mother's arms in a parking lot asking his sister to come to him, the way she had spent 2 years coming to him, putting herself between him and the danger, absorbing whatever came so he didn't have to. Except this time there was no danger to walk toward. This time there was only the asphalt and the sun and her mother and her brother and 3 bikers in a truck and a man named Flint who had sat on a Walmart floor and said nothing and let her breathe. Marin walked to them, not fast, careful. Every step measured the way she walked everywhere the way she had walked for 2 years. Her feet on the warm asphalt, her shadow stretching behind her arms at her sides, her face doing the thing it always did, holding, containing, keeping everything inside the wall she had built. She reached them. She didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She didn't fall apart because falling apart was a luxury she had never been able to afford, and the habit of holding together doesn't break just because the reason for holding together has walked out an emergency exit. She sat down next to her mother on the asphalt, put her arm around Levi, put her head on her mother's shoulder, and she said the words that had been the organizing principle of her entire life for 24 months. I kept him safe, Mom. Every time, I kept him safe. Darla's hand found Marin's hair, the ponytail, the rubber band because the hair ties were broken. She held her daughter's head against her shoulder, and she felt the shaking begin, not Marin's, her own, her body catching up to what her mind had already processed, the full weight of it settling into her bones. I know you did, but you shouldn't have had to. Someone had to. It should have been me. From now on, it's me. That's my job, not yours. You're 14. You're supposed to worry about school and friends and being 14, not about keeping your brother alive. I don't know how to stop. Then we'll figure it out together. They sat on the parking lot asphalt, the three of them, a mother in a Cracker Barrel uniform, and a 14-year-old girl with a rubber band in her hair, and a 10-year-old boy with Dorito dust on his fingers. And the sun was low now, and the shadows were long, and the Walmart parking lot was still full of people who had no idea that something had just broken open 20 feet from their shopping carts. Marin looked at her mother. Darla's name tag was still pinned to her shirt. The tag said Darla in block letters, and below it, in smaller letters, happy to help. Marin had never noticed how those words looked before. Happy to help. Her mother had worn those words on her chest every day for 3 years, while her daughter wore bruises under her sleeves. Happy to help. The cruelest irony in the world printed on a plastic rectangle and pinned over a heart that had been breaking without knowing it. Mom, there's something else. What babied I kept a notebook. I wrote everything down. Every time Grady did something, I wrote the date, what happened, what he said. I started after Mrs. Pemberton. Darla looked at her. Who is Mrs. Pemberton? The school counselor. I told her about Grady. 8 months ago, she called a meeting. Grady came to the school and he did his thing. The smile, the voice, the concerned parent act. She believed him. She told me I had behavioral issues and a vivid imagination. After that, Grady punished me for talking, and I decided I would never tell another adult until I had proof that couldn't be argued with. Darla's face went through something. Not an expression, a landscape shift. The kind of geological reorganization that happens when the ground you've been standing on reveals itself to be something else entirely. Her daughter had tried to get help. 8 months ago, a professional adult whose job was to protect children had sat in an office with a safe space poster on the wall and chosen to believe a charming man over a serious girl, and after that her daughter had been punished for trying, and after that her daughter had stopped trying and started documenting. You've been writing it down for 8 months, 7 months, in a composition notebook, black and white cover, the kind that costs $1 at the Dollar General. I keep it under my mattress. But I knew Grady searches my room, so I made a second copy. Every 2 weeks I took the notebook to school and copied the new entries into a second notebook. That one is in my locker, my hallway locker. Combination lock. I'm the only one who knows the combination. Sergeant Kessler, who had been standing nearby, stepped closer. She had heard every word. Marin, that notebook. Is it detailed dates times what happened, what he said, what I looked like after? No opinions, no adjectives, just the facts. Because I learned that opinions can be called imagination, but dates and facts are harder to argue with. Kessler looked at her partner. The partner looked back. In 15 years of patrol, Kessler had seen a lot of things. She had seen adults with law degrees fail to maintain the kind of documentation that a 14-year-old girl had built with a dollar notebook in a school locker. She had seen cases fall apart because there was no record, no dates, no specifics, just the word of a child against the word of an adult. And she was standing in a Walmart parking lot looking at a girl who had solved that problem at the age of 13 because a guidance counselor had taught her unintentionally the most important lesson of her life. Words aren't enough. Paper is. We need that notebook, Kessler said. Both copies. The one under my mattress might be gone. Marin said it without emotion. He searches my room. If he went home after he ran, he might have found it. But that's the old one. I stopped updating it 2 months ago. The complete one is at the school. Kessler's radio crackled. She stepped away, spoke into it, stepped back. Marin, you said if he went home, he might have found the notebook under your mattress. Do you think that's where he went? Marin thought of moths. She thought about it the way she thought about everything related to Grady, systematically running the scenario through the model she had built of his behavior over 2 years of observation. He knows about the notebook. I don't know how. But he searches my room. He's looked through my backpack, my drawers, my closet. He's methodical about it. He puts things back, but not exactly right. I can always tell. If he ran from the Walmart and he knows the police are coming, the first thing he'll do is protect himself. And the thing he needs to get rid of is the notebook. So yes, I think he went home. She was 14. She was sitting on a parking lot with Dorito dust on her brother's fingers and a rubber band in her hair, and she had just profiled the behavioral pattern of her abuser with the accuracy of a forensic analyst, because she'd had no choice but to become one. At 5:51 p.m., South Charleston PD dispatched a unit to Darla Braden's duplex on the south side. The officers arrived 7 minutes later. The front door was open. Not unlocked. Open. The frame near the deadbolt showed fresh splinters where someone had shouldered it in. Inside the duplex was a mess. Specifically, Marin's room was a mess. The mattress was off the bed, flipped against the wall. The drawers were pulled out and upside down on the floor. The closet had been emptied, clothes and shoes and school binders scattered across the carpet. Grady Prescott was in the room. He was on his knees next to the bed frame, pulling at the box spring when the officers came through the bedroom door. He had a black and white composition notebook in his left hand, the one from under the mattress, the old one. The one Marin had stopped updating 2 months ago because she had learned to keep the real records somewhere he could never reach. He looked up at the officers with the expression of a man who had just realized that the 14-year-old girl he had underestimated for 2 years was smarter than him, had always been smarter than him, had been smarter than him from the moment she sat in Mrs. Pemberton's office and watched a guidance counselor choose a man's smile over a girl's truth, and decided at 13 years old that she would build a case so thorough, so meticulous, so grounded in dates and facts, in the cold architecture of evidence, that no one would ever be able to choose the smile again. He had the old notebook. She had the complete one. And it was in a school locker with a combination lock, and he had never known it existed. Grady Prescott was arrested at 5:58 p.m. by Shinum Bean in the bedroom of a 14-year-old girl whose mattress he had torn off the bed, looking for evidence that she had been too smart to leave there. The charges were listed methodically the way Marin would have appreciated. 2 counts of assault on a minor, child endangerment, fleeing the scene of an active investigation, unlawful entry, destruction of property. He was handcuffed on the floor of Marin's room, surrounded by the scattered contents of her life, her school binders and her shoes and her clothes, and the officer who cuffed him later said that the man didn't fight, didn't resist, didn't say a word. He just kept looking at the composition notebook in the evidence bag like he couldn't understand how a dollar notebook and a girl with no power had beaten him. It hadn't been the notebook that beat him, it had been the girl. The notebook was just the weapon she had built, because every other weapon available to her, her voice, her honesty, her willingness to tell an adult the truth, had been taken away. Back at the Walmart, Flint was standing by his truck. Kedge was next to him, arms crossed, quiet. Briggs was sitting on his bike with his helmet on the tank. Rowan was leaning against his bike, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. None of them were talking. 4 men who had built lives out of being loud and taking up space, standing silent in a Walmart parking lot while a mother held her children on the ground. There was nothing to say, not because there were no words, but because the words that existed were too small for what they had witnessed. A 10-year-old boy running for help, a 14-year-old girl who had stayed behind, a system built by a child because the adults in her life had failed to build one for her. Kedge looked at Flint. The 2 men had known each other for 12 years, ridden together in heat and rain, and that one January ride to Beckley that they both agreed was the worst idea anyone had ever had. They had buried a club brother together. They had built a ramp for a veteran's wheelchair together. They had the kind of friendship that doesn't require conversation because the silences are already full. Kedge looked at the family on the asphalt, looked back at Flint. "We should do something," he said. "We did something. I mean after. Something that lasts. So the next kid who runs out of a store finds someone who knows what to do." Flint didn't respond, but he heard it. And the idea, which would become something real, something with a name and a purpose and a bright orange card in every Walmart in Kanawha County, started there. In a parking lot. In a silence between two men who had learned that sometimes the thing you're supposed to do finds you in a place you weren't expecting. Darla found Flint before she left. Marin and Levi were in the car. Levi in the back seat, already drifting into the half-sleep of a child whose adrenaline has finally burned off his head against the window. His eyes closing, his body giving in to the exhaustion that follows the kind of fear no 10-year-old should know. Marin was in the front passenger seat, buckled in, sitting the way she always sat, straight, careful, her hands in her lap, her eyes forward, still holding together because the habit was older than the reason, and the body doesn't know the crisis is over just because the mind does. Darla stood in front of Flint. She was still in her Cracker Barrel uniform. Black pants, name tag, the apron stuffed in her back pocket. Her eyes were swollen. Her hands were steady. "Levi said you believed him. First thing he said, the big guy believed me. He told me his sister said to run. Didn't need to hear anything else. A lot of people would have heard that and called security, or told him to go back inside, or assumed he was playing around. You know what the Walmart greeter said when Levi ran past him? He said no running in the store. My kid was running for his life, and a grown man told him to slow down." Flint didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. People have looked at my kids and not seen what was happening. Marin's teacher, our neighbors, the school counselor. Her voice cracked on the next word. Me, I was working doubles to keep the lights on and I missed it. I missed all of it. My daughter has been stepping in front of my son for 2 years and I didn't know. She tried to tell Mrs. Pemberton at the school, and Mrs. Pemberton believed Grady instead of her. And after that, Marin decided no adult could be trusted, and she was right. She was right about that. Every adult in her life let her down, including me. You were working. You were trying to keep them fed. The person who should have been helping was the person doing the hurting. That's not your fault. It feels like my fault. I know it does. It won't always. Darla looked at him, at the beard, the tattoos, the vest, the size. The kind of man she might have crossed the street to avoid a year ago if she was being honest with herself. The kind of man her son had been taught to find by a sister who understood at 12 years old that the world judged people by their surface and that sometimes the safest person in the room was the one who looked the most dangerous. She didn't hug him. She shook his hand, firm. The handshake of a woman who was done being soft about things that required being hard. "Thank you for believing my son, and thank you for going inside for my daughter." Marin was the brave one. She told Levi to run, and she stayed. She was willing to take whatever happened so her brother could get out. That's not something you teach a kid. That's something a kid just is. Darla held the handshake for an extra second. Then she let go, turned, walked to her car, got in, pulled the door shut with the careful precision of someone who was holding herself together the same way her daughter held herself together, through structure and control and the absolute refusal to break in front of people, because breaking was something you did later alone in the dark when the children were asleep and the house was quiet and the only witness was the ceiling above your bed. She pulled out of the parking lot. The car turned left onto Corridor G, and the taillights shrank and the evening traffic swallowed them, and they were gone. Flint stood by his truck. The parking lot was thinning out. The Saturday rush was over. The sun was lower, the shadows longer, the light turning that warm amber that happens in West Virginia in the minutes before the mountains eat the horizon. Kedge came up beside him, put a hand on his shoulder, didn't say anything. Just the hand, the weight of it. The pressure that said, I'm here and I saw it, and we'll figure out what comes next. Briggs started his bike. The engine cracked the quiet like a gunshot, then settled into the low rolling rumble that sounds like a heartbeat if you've been around bikes long enough. Rowan started his next. Then Kedge. Three bikes idling in a row, chrome and black paint and exhaust vapor in the amber light. Flint got in his truck. The cab smelled like sawdust and diesel, and the faint, sharp smell of the lumber still stacked in the bed. He sat behind the wheel and looked at the parking space in front of him. Third row from the garden center, the spot where Levi had crouched behind his tire, the spot where a 10-year-old boy had whispered, "She told me to run," and a 45-year-old man had felt his heart break for the first time in a way that the army and the divorce and the distance from his daughter had not managed to break it. He pulled out of the spot. The three bikes fell in behind him. Four machines moving through the parking lot in a loose formation, past the garden center, past the cart corral, past the front entrance where the automatic doors opened and closed and opened and closed. For the Saturday shoppers who were still shopping, still buying, still living inside the version of the world where a Walmart was just a Walmart and a parking lot was just a place where you left your car. The convoy turned onto Corridor G, the bikes spread out, Kedge on the left, Briggs on the right, Rowan behind. Flint's truck in the center. They rode like that for a mile, the way they always rode, in formation, in sync, in the particular silence of men who have seen something together and will carry it together and don't need to talk about it to know it's there. Then the road forked, and Kedge went south, and Briggs went east toward the river, and Rowan went north toward Sissonville, and Flint went home, to his empty house. To the quiet of a contractor's kitchen where the dishes were clean and the coffee maker was programmed for 5 a.m., and the only sound was the refrigerator humming its flat constant note. He called Nora at bedtime. 8 o'clock, the way he did every night. "Hey, Pumpkin, Daddy, guess what? I lost another tooth, the one on the side. Mama said the tooth fairy's coming tonight." "That's awesome. Did it bleed a little?" "Mama put a wet paper on it." "Daddy, do you think the tooth fairy is real or is it Mama?" "What do you think? I think it's Mama, but I think the money is real." Flint laughed. The laugh surprised him. It came from somewhere below, the thing that was sitting on his chest, the weight of the afternoon, the boy behind the tire, the girl on the floor, the mother on the asphalt. The laugh came up through all of it, and it didn't erase any of it, but it existed alongside it the way laughter and grief can exist in the same body at the same time without canceling each other out. "That's smart thinking, Nora." "Daddy, are you okay?" "You sound different." "I'm okay. I had a long day. But I'm okay. Did you help someone?" She asked this sometimes. She knew her father helped people, not in the abstract charitable sense, in the specific physical sense. He built houses, he fixed things, he showed up when his phone rang, and his club brothers needed something. Nora had absorbed this about her father the way children absorb the core truths of their parents, not through explanation, but through observation. Her father was a man who helped. It was as fundamental to her understanding of him as his beard and his truck and his bedtime voice. "Yeah, Pumpkin, I helped someone today." "Good. Mama says helping is the best thing. Your mama's right." He said goodnight, set the phone on the kitchen counter, stood in the quiet of his house, and thought about a 14-year-old girl who had been helping her brother for 2 years, and nobody had helped her. And she had not complained, had not stopped, had not broken, had simply built a system and maintained it with the discipline of someone who understood that nobody was coming, and that nobody was coming was not a reason to stop. She had kept a notebook, a dollar composition notebook from the Dollar General. She had written in it for 7 months. She had made a second copy and locked it in her school locker because she knew that the man who hurt her also searched her room. And she had been right because when the police found him, he was on his knees in her bedroom with the old notebook in his hand, and the real one was in a locker he didn't know about. 14 years old. And she had outthought him. She had outthought the school counselor. She had outthought every adult who had chosen comfort over truth. She had built a case alone in silence with a dollar notebook and a combination lock, and when the moment came, the case was there. Complete, detailed, undeniable. Not because anyone had taught her how, because she had taught herself. Because she had learned at 13 that the world gives adults the benefit of the doubt and gives children appointments with guidance counselors. And she had decided that if the world wasn't going to believe her voice, she would give it something it couldn't argue with. Paper, dates, facts, the quiet, relentless architecture of truth built one entry at a time in a notebook that cost $1 and was worth more than any testimony a courtroom had ever heard. because it was the work of a girl who had no power and no allies and no one to turn to, and she had turned that nothing into evidence. Flint stood in his kitchen and thought about that, and then he went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about it some more, and the thought didn't leave. It stayed the way certain thoughts stay heavy and bright and permanent, like a nail driven into wood. The kind of thought that changes the shape of what comes next, because what comes next was a phone call and a courtroom and a woman named Nadine Fay who would stand up in a room full of strangers and say, "I know what he did because he did it to us too," and a bright orange card in every Walmart in Kanawha County. But that was later. That was part 3. Right now, it was Saturday night in South Charleston, West Virginia. A 14-year-old girl was in a duplex with a broken front door and a mattress that was back on the bed, but not the same bed, not really, because the room had been searched and the searching had changed it the way violence changes a room even after you clean it up. The girl was lying in that bed in the dark, and her brother was asleep in the next room, and her mother was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, staring at the wall doing the math on 2 years of missed signals. And the girl was not sleeping. She was lying on her back, looking at the ceiling, her hands on her stomach, her breathing steady, her mind running through the events of the day, the way she ran through everything systematically, looking for errors, looking for gaps, looking for the place where the system had worked and the place where it had almost failed. The system had worked. Levi was safe. Grady was arrested. The notebook was in police custody, both copies, the old one from the mattress and the complete one that Sergeant Kessler had retrieved from the school locker that evening after Marin gave her the combination, the first time she had ever given that combination to anyone. The system had worked. And the girl who had built it was lying in the dark, 14 years old, and she was not relieved. She was not celebrating. She was not feeling the feelings that people expect you to feel when the thing you've been fighting is finally gone. She was feeling the thing that comes after. The empty space, the place where the hypervigilance used to be, the constant scanning, the mood reading, the exit mapping, the protocol running. All of it had been purpose. All of it had been structure. All of it had been the architecture of survival. And now the threat was gone, and the architecture was still standing, and she was inside it alone, with no one to protect and nothing to prepare for, and no idea what a 14-year-old girl does with her time when she's not running a 2-year security operation for her 10-year-old brother. She lay in the dark, and she thought about the man on the Walmart floor. Flint, the big man who had sat across from her in the clearance aisle and said nothing, who had not tried to fix her or comfort her or tell her it was going to be okay, who had just been there, present, a wall between her and whatever might come next. She thought about how he had looked at her, not with pity, not with the expression adults use when they've decided you're broken and they want to help you back together. He had looked at her the way you look at someone who has done something extraordinary and you know it and they don't. With respect. That was the word. The man had looked at her with respect. She had not been looked at with respect by an adult in 2 years. She had been looked at with suspicion by Grady, with pity by Mrs. Pemberton, with distracted love by her mother, with confusion by teachers who couldn't understand why a bright girl was so quiet, but not respect. Marin Braden lay in the dark in a room that had been ransacked and put back together. And she thought about respect, and she thought about the notebook, and she thought about the fact that tomorrow was Sunday, and she didn't have to read Grady's mood at breakfast, and she didn't have to position herself between him and Levi, and she didn't have to scan for exits or run scenarios or brace for contact. Tomorrow was just Sunday. That was all. Just a day. The kind of day other 14-year-olds had been having for years. The kind of day she had forgotten existed. She closed her eyes, not because she was tired, because she wanted to practice what it felt like to close her eyes in a house where the only people present were people who loved her. It felt unfamiliar. It felt like wearing shoes that were the right size after years of wearing shoes that were too tight. The relief was physical, but the body didn't trust it yet. The body was still braced. The body was still waiting. It would take a long time for the body to stop waiting. Longer than the mind. The mind could process and categorize and file away the threat as resolved. The body doesn't work that way. The body remembers in its own language, a language of flinch and tension, and the involuntary hardening of muscles when a door opens too fast or a voice rises too loud, or a hand moves too quickly in the peripheral vision. But the body can also learn. It can relearn. It can, with time and patience and the steady, repeated evidence of safety, begin to soften, begin to trust, begin to let the architecture of survival thin out wall by wall until what's left is not a fortress, but a home. Marin didn't know that yet. She would learn it, but not tonight. Tonight, she was 14 years old and lying in the dark in a room that smelled like her own laundry detergent and the faint ghost of the cologne Grady had worn, which would take 3 washes of the curtains and 2 of the carpet to fully remove, and she was breathing. That was all. Just breathing. In and out. The most basic function of a body that had spent 2 years doing extraordinary things. In and out. In the dark. In the quiet. In the first night of whatever came next. The Kanawha County Courthouse sits on Virginia Street in Charleston, West Virginia. It is a building made of limestone in purpose with columns at the entrance and hallways that echo and courtrooms where the air smells like old wood and floor polish, and the particular staleness of rooms where people's lives are decided by other people sitting in chairs. Marin Braden walked into that building on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 weeks after the Walmart. She was wearing clothes her mother had bought her the week before, new clothes. Not clearance, not goodwill, because Darla had taken a hard look at the family budget and decided that her daughter was going to walk into a courtroom looking like a girl who deserved to be believed, and that meant new shoes and a shirt that fit and jeans without holes at the knees. Marin had argued against the new clothes, not because she didn't want them, because spending money on her felt wrong. It had felt wrong for 2 years. Every dollar Darla earned was a dollar that kept the lights on, or put food in the refrigerator, or covered the rent on the duplex, and Marin had internalized that math so deeply that buying herself a $12 shirt from Target felt like stealing from her own family. Darla had looked at her across the kitchen table where they'd been having this conversation, and she had said something that Marin would remember for the rest of her life. She said, "You have been spending yourself on this family for 2 years. Your time, your body, your sleep, your childhood. You spent all of it, and you never once asked for change. So I am buying you a shirt, Marin, and you are going to let me, because that is the smallest thing I can do, and I need to do at least the smallest thing." Marin let her buy the shirt. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It was not a trial. It was the proceeding that determined whether there was enough evidence to move forward to trial. And in the weeks since the Walmart, the evidence had grown the way evidence grows when someone has been documenting it meticulously for 7 months in a dollar composition notebook. The notebook was the centerpiece. Sergeant Kessler had retrieved the complete version from Marin's school locker the evening of the Walmart. The combination was 143208. Marin had chosen those numbers for a reason she never told anyone. 14 was her age. 32 was the number of incidents she had documented by the time she set the combination. 8 was how old Levi had been when Grady moved in. The lock held everything that mattered, and the numbers that opened it were a map of everything she had lost. The prosecution had entered the notebook as evidence. 117 handwritten entries spanning 7 months. Dates, times, locations, descriptions. What Grady did, what Grady said afterward, where Levi was during each incident, where Darla was, what Marin looked like in the mirror when she checked for marks. She had written it all in the same careful factual prose she used for everything, no emotion, no adjectives, no pleas for help. Just the record. The cold, meticulous, undeniable record of a girl who had learned that the truth needs architecture to stand up in a world that prefers the convenience of looking away. Grady Prescott's attorney was a man named Dale Sutter, a public defender from Kanawha County, who had been practicing law for 22 years and had seen enough cases to know when one was lost before it started. But his job was to defend, and he did it the way he always did, by attacking the credibility of the accusers. He started with the behavioral issues. The vivid imagination, the same language Grady had used with Mrs. Pemberton, the same script. The argument was that Marin was a troubled girl from a broken home with a history of making things up for attention, and that the notebook was not evidence but fiction, a creative project by a child who had confused her imagination with reality. It was a strategy that had worked before. It had worked in Mrs. Pemberton's office. It had worked because Grady was in the room wearing the mask, performing the concerned parent, and the performance was convincing enough that a professional whose job was to protect children chose to believe it. But Grady was not in the room this time. Not in the way that mattered. He was sitting at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, unshaven, without the button-down shirt, and the easy smile and the warm voice. The mask was gone. Not because he had chosen to remove it, because the context had removed it for him. An orange jumpsuit does not accommodate masks. A defendant's table does not support performances. The architecture of the courtroom had stripped him of his primary weapon, and what was left was a stocky man with a shaved head and flat eyes and nothing between him and the truth except a public defender's argument that a 14-year-old girl was making it all up. Marin took the stand. She had been prepared by the prosecutor, a woman named Gail Thornton, who had spent 2 hours with Marin in her office the week before, not coaching her, not telling her what to say, but helping her understand the process. The questions that would come, the way the defense would try to rattle her, the importance of staying calm, staying factual, staying inside the architecture she had already built. Marin didn't need the coaching. She had been calm and factual for 2 years. It was the only mode she had. She sat in the witness chair, which was too big for her the way most adult furniture is too big for a 14-year-old, and she answered the prosecutor's questions the way she had written the notebook. Dates, times, what happened, what he said, where Levi was, where her mother was, what she did to protect her brother, how she learned to read Grady's moods, how she built the system, how she tried to tell Mrs. Pemberton, how Mrs. Pemberton believed Grady, how she started the notebook that night in bed in the dark with a pen and a composition book, and the decision that if adults wouldn't believe her voice, she would give them something they couldn't argue with. The courtroom was quiet, not the quiet of boredom, the quiet of people listening. The judge, the attorneys, the clerk, the handful of observers in the gallery, all of them watching this girl in her new Target shirt and her ponytail, this girl who was speaking in a voice that had no tremor in it because she had trained the tremor out of herself the way athletes train weaknesses out of their stride. The defense attorney began his cross-examination. He was gentle at first, the way lawyers are gentle when they're approaching a child witness, because juries and judges notice when an adult is aggressive with a kid, and the optics matter as much as the substance. Marin, you have a pretty active imagination, don't you? No, sir. Your teachers have said you're creative. You write stories for class. I write essays. I don't write fiction. But you could write fiction, couldn't you? You have the skills. Marin looked at him, not with defiance, with the quiet patience of someone who has been underestimated before and has learned to let the underestimation work in her favor. I could write fiction, but I didn't. The notebook has dates. The dates match calendar events, school holidays, my mother's work schedule. I wrote that we went to Golden Corral on March 15th. My mother's bank statement shows a charge at Golden Corral on March 15th. I wrote that Grady picked us up from school early on April 7th. The school has a sign-out record for April 7th with his signature. Every entry in that notebook can be verified by something other than my word. I didn't make it that way by accident. Sutter paused. The pause was the legal equivalent of a man who has stepped on something unexpected and is looking down to see what it is. He had expected a 14-year-old. He had gotten something else. He had gotten a girl who had spent 7 months building a document designed specifically to withstand the argument he was making, and she had built it at 13 alone in a room where the man she was documenting searched her belongings, and she had done it so well that a 22-year veteran of the Kanawha County Public Defender's Office was standing in a courtroom with nothing left to say. He moved on. He asked about the behavioral issues, about the claims Grady had made at the school meeting. Marin answered each one the same way, with facts, with dates, with the structural integrity of someone who had been stress testing her own credibility for months because she knew this moment was coming and she had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything. Methodically, completely, without leaving gaps. Then the thing happened that nobody in the courtroom expected. Gail Thornton, the prosecutor, called a witness that was not on the original list. The defense objected. The judge allowed it after a brief sidebar. The courtroom doors opened and a woman walked in. She was in her early 30s, thin, brown hair cut short. She was wearing a blue blouse that she kept smoothing with her right hand, the fabric bunching and releasing between her fingers in a rhythm that anyone who understood anxiety would recognize as the physical expression of a mind that was running at full speed and a body that was trying to keep up. Her name was Nadine Fay. She walked to the witness stand. She sat down. She looked at Grady Prescott at the defense table, and Grady looked at her, and something moved across his face that was not the mask and was not the anger, but was something worse. Recognition. The recognition of a man who has just seen his past walk through a door he thought was closed. Nadine Fay had been Grady Prescott's girlfriend before Darla, 3 years before, in Fayette County, 40 minutes south. She had a daughter, Brinley, who was 11 years old now, but had been 8 when Grady moved into their apartment on Maple Street in Oak Hill, with a toolbox and a smile and a plan that looked exactly like the plan he had brought to Darla's duplex, because it was the same plan. It was always the same plan. Nadine spoke. Her voice was not calm the way Marin's was calm. Her voice shook. She was not 14 years old, and she had not spent 2 years training herself to be a witness. She was a woman in her early 30s who had spent 3 years trying to forget what happened in the apartment on Maple Street and had not succeeded because the body remembers what the mind tries to file away. She told the courtroom about Grady, the charm, the first months, the shift, the voice that changed when the door closed, the hands that gripped too tight, the smile that came back when other people were watching, the same pattern, the same escalation, the same mask. She told them about Brinley, about the day she came home from work and found her daughter sitting on the bathroom floor with a bruise on her arm in the shape of 4 fingers and a thumb, about how she called the police, about how Grady arrived before the police did and was standing in the kitchen when they knocked, wearing the mask, the button-down shirt of charm, the easy voice, the concerned partner posture, and how he told the officers that Brinley had fallen off her bike and that Nadine was prone to overreaction, and the officers had looked at the bike in the yard and looked at the bruise and made a judgment call, and the judgment call was wrong. The officers left. Grady stayed. Nadine left 2 weeks later at 3 in the morning with Brinley in the back seat and a garbage bag of clothes in the trunk, and she drove to her mother's house in Beckley, and she never went back. She had filed a report. The report went nowhere. There was insufficient evidence. There was no documentation. There was only her word and Brinley's word against the word of a man who smiled in the right places and said the right things, and the system, which was supposed to protect people like Nadine and Brinley, had looked at the smile and the word and the insufficient evidence and closed the file. Nadine had not known about Darla, had not known about Marin and Levi, had not known that the man who had hurt her daughter had moved 40 minutes north and found another family and done the same thing. She learned about it the way most people learn about things in small-town West Virginia. Someone who knew someone who read something in the newspaper told someone at a church potluck in Oak Hill, and that someone called Nadine, and Nadine sat in her car in her mother's driveway in Beckley and read the article on her phone and felt the thing that people feel when they discover that the monster they escaped went on to find someone else. She called the prosecutor's office the next morning. She said, "I know what he did because he did it to us too. And I don't have a notebook with dates and facts and entries. I wish I did. But I have a daughter who still flinches when a man raises his voice, and that should count for something." Nadine looked at Marin in the courtroom. Marin was sitting in the gallery now, next to her mother, next to Levi, who was holding Darla's hand and swinging his feet because the bench was too tall for his legs to reach the floor. Nadine looked at this 14-year-old girl who had done the thing that she, an adult, had not been able to do. Build a record, document the pattern, create the evidence that turns a he said, she said into something that can't be argued with. That girl did what I couldn't, Nadine said, and her voice broke on the word girl because the word carried the weight of everything she wished she had done and hadn't. I didn't write anything down. I didn't keep records. I just ran. And because I didn't have proof, he walked. He walked and he found another family, and he did it again. This girl, this 14-year-old girl, sat in her room with a notebook, and she wrote down every single thing he did. And because she did that, he can't walk this time. She looked at Grady. He was looking at the table. Not at her, not at anyone. His hands were flat on the surface, his shoulders curled inward, the posture of a man whose architecture was collapsing in real time. Nadine Fay's testimony established pattern. It established that Grady Prescott was not a good man who had made a mistake with one family. He was a man who had a method. Charm, then control, then escalation. The toolbox and the smile and the move-in, the mask for the outside world, the reality behind closed doors. He had done it before. He was doing it again. And the only reason it stopped this time was because a 12-year-old girl had watched a guidance counselor choose a man's smile over a child's truth and decided that she would build a weapon the guidance counselor could not ignore. Grady Prescott pleaded guilty 4 weeks later. His attorney had advised a plea after the preliminary hearing, after the notebook, after Nadine, after the weight of the evidence made trial a guaranteed loss. The plea carried a sentence that reflected the pattern. This was not a single incident. This was a system, the same word Marin used for her protection protocols, except Grady's system was designed to destroy, and Marin's was designed to survive, and in the end, the survival system outlasted the destruction system because a dollar notebook turned out to be stronger than a practiced smile. Marin did not attend the sentencing. She did not want to see Grady again. She had seen enough of him to last several lifetimes, and the courtroom with its limestone columns and echoing hallways was a place she associated with the telling of a story she wanted to stop telling and start living past. Darla attended. She sat in the gallery and listened to the judge read the sentence, and she felt the weight of it settle into her chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, something heavier and more complicated. The weight of knowing that the system had worked eventually, but only because her daughter had forced it to work. The system had not protected Marin. Marin had protected the system's case, and there was a difference between those two things that Darla would think about for years. She walked out of the courthouse into the November light. The air was cold and smelled like wet leaves and car exhaust. She stood on the steps and looked at the street and the traffic and the people walking past ordinary people on an ordinary Tuesday. And she thought about the word ordinary and how it had a different meaning now. Ordinary meant Grady was gone. Ordinary meant the front door locked properly because the landlord had replaced the frame that Grady had shouldered in. Ordinary meant Marin could leave a notebook on her desk without wondering if it would be there when she got home. Ordinary meant Levi could spill water at dinner without consequence. Ordinary was the thing she was trying to rebuild one day at a time with the tools she had available, which were fewer and simpler than she wanted them to be, but enough to start. The rebuilding took time. It took longer than the crisis. This is the thing nobody tells you about the aftermath. The crisis has a shape. It has a beginning, a middle, and end. The aftermath has no shape. It is formless and ongoing, and it doesn't announce itself with running or hiding or notebooks. It announces itself at breakfast when Marin flinches because a cabinet door closes too hard. It announces itself at bedtime when Levi asks if the front door is locked and then asks again. It announces itself in the grocery store when Darla sees a mountaineer's hoodie on a stranger and her hands go cold. Darla quit the doubles at Cracker Barrel. She took a day shift position at the hospital, patient services, answering phones and processing intake forms. The pay was less. The hours were human. She was home by 5 every day, which meant she was there when Marin and Levi got home from school, which meant the duplex had a person in it who was supposed to be there, and that person was their mother, and her presence changed the air the way opening a window changes the air. Not a fix, a start. She said something about it once to a friend at church. The friend had asked how she was managing on less money. I used to think keeping the lights on was the most important thing, Darla said. It's not. Being home is. The lights don't matter if your kids are sitting in the dark. Levi started therapy in November. A woman named Dr. Klein, whose office was on the second floor of a building on Capitol Street that had a fish tank in the waiting room. Levi liked the fish tank. He liked the blue tang that hid behind the fake coral and came out when the room was quiet. He told Dr. Klein that the blue tang reminded him of himself, hiding until it felt safe, coming out when the noise stopped. The therapy took a year to show results that looked like results. For 12 months, the work was invisible. It happened in the spaces between the words, in the pauses where Levi sat on the couch in Dr. Klein's office and stared at the fish tank and let the silence do what silence does when it's held by someone who isn't trying to fill it. Slowly in increments so small they were measured in breaths rather than milestones. Levi stopped flinching when adults raised their voices. He stopped checking the front door 3 times before bed. He stopped sleeping with his shoes on, which was a thing he had been doing for 2 years, because Marin had taught him to be ready to run, and the readiness had become a habit, and the habit had become a symptom. He still talked about the truck, in therapy, in school essays, in conversations with Flint when the Elk River Iron came around for community events, which they did more frequently now because the club had decided in the way that motorcycle clubs decide things collectively without a vote, through the consensus of men who recognize a moment that requires action, that the Braden family was part of their territory now, not their property, their responsibility. Levi talked about the truck the way people talk about landmarks. The tire was warm from the sun. The asphalt was rough under his knees. The wheel well smelled like road dust and brake fluid. The lumber in the truck bed smelled like sawdust, and underneath that diesel from the tailpipe, and underneath that something else, something he couldn't name but associated with safety. He told Dr. Klein that the 5 minutes behind the tire were the bridge. That's the word he used. Bridge. He said everything before the truck was one thing, and everything after the truck was another thing, and the 5 minutes behind the tire was the bridge between them. He told Flint the same thing at a club cookout the following spring. The Elk River Iron held cookouts at Kedge's property, a 3-acre lot outside of Charleston, with a barn and a fire pit and enough parking for the bikes and a view of the Elk River that looked like something from a postcard if you ignored the chemical plant on the opposite bank. I picked your truck because it was the biggest thing in the parking lot, Levi said. He was holding a hot dog in one hand and a can of grape soda in the other, and he was sitting on a log next to the fire pit with the casual ease of a boy who was comfortable around large men with beards and tattoos, which was a comfort that had been earned in a Walmart parking lot and reinforced at every cookout and every community event, and every time one of the Elk River brothers showed up at a school function or a track meet and stood in the back row like a wall that nothing bad could get past. Marin taught me. She said if you need help, find the biggest person you can. She said big people are harder to argue with. What if it had been some little Honda? Flint asked. Then I would have kept running until I found a truck. Flint laughed, the first real laugh he'd had about that day. The sound of it surprised him the way laughter still surprised him when it came from the vicinity of that memory. The memory was heavy. It would always be heavy. But the laugh existed alongside it now the way wildflowers grow in places where the soil has been disturbed. Not because of the disturbance, in spite of it, smart kid Flint said. Marin taught me, Levi said again. Because for Levi, every good decision he had made on that Saturday afternoon traced back to the same source. His sister, the girl who had taught him to run, the girl who had taught him to find the biggest thing, the girl who had stayed behind so he could get out. The Elk River Iron MC launched the program in January, 8 months after the Walmart. They called it Run and Tell, which were the words Marin had said to Levi, and the words Levi had carried into the parking lot, and the words that had started everything. The program was simple in the way that the best things are simple. Bright orange information cards the size of a business card printed on thick stock with rounded corners. The cards were placed in Walmart's grocery stores, gas stations, laundromats, and parking lots across Kanawha County. They were tucked into community bulletin boards and taped to bathroom mirrors and slipped into the plastic holders on shopping cart handles. The front of the card read, "If a child runs to you." Below that, 4 words each on its own line. Stop, listen, believe, call 911. And at the bottom in smaller text, you might be the only adult who does. Kedge had the idea. Flint funded the first print run. Briggs and Rowan handled distribution. The design was Kedge's wife, who worked in graphic design and donated her time. But the words on the card were Marin's. She had written them at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in December. Darla was making dinner. Levi was doing homework at the other end of the table, his pencil scratching in the quiet, his blue tang concentration face on tongue between his teeth. Flint had called that afternoon and asked Marin if she wanted to help with the wording. He hadn't asked out of politeness. He had asked because he understood something that most adults don't understand about children who have survived what Marin survived. They don't need to be rescued. They need to be useful. They need to know that the thing they went through produced something other than damage. They need to see their experience converted into action, because action is the antidote to helplessness. And helplessness is the thing that lingers longest after the crisis is over. Marin had sat with a piece of notebook paper, the lined kind, and she had written several versions. Flint had suggested language about recognizing signs of abuse, about calling hotlines, about being vigilant. Marin had crossed all of it out. That's too much, she said. If there's too much information, people won't read it. They'll look at it and feel overwhelmed and put it back. It has to be simple. 4 things. Stop, listen, believe, call. That's it. That's what I needed someone to do. Nobody stopped. Nobody listened. Mrs. Pemberton didn't believe me. Nobody called. She wrote the bottom line last. You might be the only adult who does. She had stared at that line for a long time before she showed it to anyone because the line was not about other children. The line was about her. She had been the child that adults walked past, the child that a guidance counselor dismissed, the child that an entire Walmart full of Saturday shoppers had failed to see. And the line was her way of saying that to the world without saying it about herself. The cards went out in January. By March, there were 6,000 in circulation across Kanawha County. By June, a teacher in Putnam County requested a box for her school. By September, the program had been featured in a local news segment, and a nonprofit in Cabell County had adapted the card for their own distribution. The bright orange cards, the color of traffic cones, the color of warning, the color of the vests that crossing guards wear began showing up in places Marin had never been held, by people she would never meet, read by adults who might someday stop and listen and believe and call. She didn't talk about the cards much. She didn't talk about the Walmart much. She didn't talk about Grady at all. She was 14, then 15, then 16. And the thing she talked about, the thing she thought about, the thing she organized her life around was running. Not the running she had done before. Not the running that meant something was wrong. A different kind of running. The kind that happened on a track in lanes with a number pinned to your jersey and a starting block under your feet and a finish line that you could see from the moment the gun went off. She joined the track team at South Charleston High in her sophomore year. She ran the 400 meters, or the quarter mile. 400 meters of controlled speed, the race that coaches call the hardest event in track because it is not a sprint and it is not a distance race. It is the race that lives in the space between those two things. It requires speed and endurance and the ability to pace yourself through pain and come out the other side still running. Her coach was a man named Duval. He had been coaching track at South Charleston for 9 years, and he had seen a lot of runners, talented runners, fast runners, dedicated runners. He had not seen a runner like Marin. She didn't have the longest stride or the fastest start. What she had was discipline that looked like something else. It looked like practice, but it wasn't practice, not the kind that happens on a track. It was the discipline of a girl who had spent 2 years managing her body's response to fear, controlling her breathing, controlling her movement, controlling the pace at which she moved through dangerous spaces. The skills that had kept her alive in a duplex with Grady Prescott translated directly, almost perfectly, to the skills required to run 400 meters at full capacity without breaking form. She never complained during training. She never quit a rep. She never slowed in the final 100 meters when every other runner's form broke down, when the lactic acid hit and the legs went heavy and the lungs screamed and the body said stop. Marin did not stop. She had been trained by 2 years of something far worse than interval workouts to push through the moment when the body says stop, because stopping had never been an option. Where do you learn to push through pain like that? Coach Duval asked her once after a practice where she had run 8 400-meter repeats without a single rep, slower than 68 seconds. The other girls were bent over, hands on knees, gasping. Marin was standing upright, breathing hard, but controlled her ponytail, swinging her face, showing effort but not surrender. Practice, she said. And she didn't mean track practice. But Duval didn't know that, and she didn't explain, because the explanation belonged to a part of her life that she was building a wall around, not to hide it, but to contain it, to keep it in its place so it didn't leak into the parts of her life that she was building new. The regional meet was in April, spring in West Virginia, which means unpredictable. The morning started cold, 42 degrees, the kind of cold that makes you question the concept of outdoor sports. By noon, it was 58, and the sun was out, and the track at Laidleyfield was dry, and the bleachers were filling with parents and coaches and teammates, and the particular energy that surrounds high school athletics, which is the energy of young people doing difficult things while the people who love them watch. Marin was in lane 4. She had drawn it in the seating, which placed her in the middle of the field, with runners on both sides, which meant she would see the leaders in the stagger and gauge her pace by their positions. She stood on the starting block and put her fingers on the track. The surface was warm from the afternoon sun. The rubber was gritty under her fingertips. She could hear the crowd, a murmur of voices and shuffling feet, and the occasional shout from a coach. She could hear the wind light from the southwest, which would be at her back on the final straight. She could hear Levi. He was in the stands. She didn't have to look. She could hear him the way she had always been able to find him, by the specific frequency of his voice, which was deeper now than it had been 2 years ago, but still carried the same three-note hum when he was nervous and the same full-volume shout when he was excited. He was excited now. He was shouting her name from somewhere in the middle of the bleachers, and the sound of it reached her on the starting block the way sunlight reaches the bottom of deep water, diminished but unmistakable. Darla was next to him. Marin knew this without looking because Darla came to every meet now. She had rearranged her schedule at the hospital to make every single one because being present was the currency she traded in now, the coin of the realm in the new economy of their family, where showing up was worth more than any double shift had ever earned. And in the back row of the bleachers, because they always sat in the back row, were Flint Hargrove and Kedge Tully. Two men in leather vests and boots sitting among the parents and the grandparents and the siblings, looking exactly like what they were, which was bikers at a high school track meet, which was a thing that made no sense unless you knew the story, and the people around them didn't know the story, but they knew enough to know that these men were here for a reason, and the reason was the girl in lane 4. The Elk River Iron had been coming to Marin's meet since the first one. It had not been announced or organized. It had simply happened the way things happen in a motorcycle club, through the organic consensus of men who had been in a parking lot on a Saturday afternoon and had decided without discussion that this girl's races were something they attended. Flint came to every one, Kedge to most. Briggs and Rowan rotated. There was always at least one vest in the back row. Marin never acknowledged them during a meet. She didn't wave. She didn't look for them. She didn't need to. She knew they were there the way she knew Levi was there and Darla was there, by feel. By the atmospheric change that happens when the people who showed up for you in the worst moment of your life keep showing up for the ordinary moments after. The gun fired. Marin came off the block clean. Her start was not explosive. It was controlled, measured, the way she did everything. She hit the first curve at a pace that was faster than her usual opening, and Coach Duvall, standing at the 200-meter mark with a stopwatch, raised his eyebrows because the split was 62, and she usually ran 65 through the first half. She hit the back straight, 200 meters. The point in the 400 where most runners are still comfortable, still running within themselves, still holding form. Marin was holding form. Her arms were pumping in tight, efficient arcs. Her stride was long but not overextended. Her breathing was rhythmic. She came through the final curve, 300 meters. This is where the race happens. This is where the lactic acid arrives like an uninvited guest and sits on your legs and your lungs and your will. This is where runners start to break. Their shoulders rise, their arms flail, their stride shortens, and their feet start slapping the track instead of driving off it. This is the 100 meters that separates the disciplined from the talented, the trained from the gifted. Marin did not break. She came off the final curve and into the home straight, and she was in the lead 3 meters clear of the girl in lane 5, and her form was intact. Arms tight, stride long, eyes on the finish line, which was 70 meters away, then 50, then 30, and the crowd was on its feet because the people in the stands could see what was happening. They could see a girl running the last 100 meters of a quarter mile without breaking form, without slowing, without the visible suffering that every other runner in the field was displaying, and they didn't know why, and it didn't matter why, because the why was hers and the running was theirs to watch. And what they were watching was a 16-year-old girl crossing a finish line 3 full seconds ahead of the field. 3 seconds. In the 400 meters, 3 seconds is a lifetime. 3 seconds is dominance. 3 seconds is the margin of a runner who was not in a race with the other girls on the track, but was in a race with something else, something internal, something that had been chasing her for 4 years, and that she had finally, on a warm April afternoon at Laidley Field, outrun. She crossed the line, slowed, bent at the waist with her hands on her knees, breathed. The air was warm and tasted like rubber and sweat and the particular sweetness of cut grass from the infield. Levi was screaming her name from the bleachers. Not the three-note hum, the full-volume 12-year-old uninhibited shout of a brother who had watched his sister do something extraordinary and wanted the entire state of West Virginia to know about it. Darla was standing next to him, her hand over her mouth, crying the way mothers cry at track meets, not because the race was fast, but because the girl who ran it was her daughter. And her daughter was running, and the running meant something different now than it had meant before. In the back row, Flint sat with his arms on his knees, watching. Kedge was next to him, clapping the slow, heavy clap of a man whose hands are the size of dinner plates. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their presence was the statement. After the race, a reporter from the Charleston Gazette-Mail found Marin near the concession stand. She was drinking water and stretching and doing the post-race routine that Coach Duval required of all his runners. The reporter was young mid-20s with a notebook and a voice recorder. She had been covering the regional meet, and she had seen the 3-second margin, and she wanted to know about the girl who had run the 400 like she was being chased by something nobody else could see. Marin, that was an incredible race. What does running mean to you? Marin thought about the question. She stood there with the water bottle in her hand and the April sun on her face, and the sound of Levi's voice still ringing somewhere in the back of her hearing, and she thought about what running meant. When I was 12, running meant something was wrong. She said it simply, without drama, without the cinematic pause that a different person might have inserted for effect. She said it the way she said everything, as a fact, as a piece of the record, as a date and a time and a thing that happened. Now it means I'm fast. That's it. I'm just fast. The reporter wrote it down. She didn't know the full weight of what she had written. She didn't know about the Walmart or the tire or the notebook or the school counselor who chose a smile over a truth. She just wrote down the words because the words were good, and the girl who said them was fast, and the story would run in tomorrow's sports section with a photo of a 16-year-old girl crossing a finish line with 3 seconds of daylight between her and the next runner. But the words were more than a quote. They were a translation. They were the conversion of 4 years of surviving into 2 sentences that contained everything and explained nothing because the explanation was private and the running was public. And Marin had learned a long time ago that you could give the world the result without giving it the reason. When I was 12, running meant something was wrong. Now it means I'm fast. That was her story, the whole thing. From the Walmart to the courtroom to the track. From the girl holding a shopping basket like a shield to the girl holding a water bottle after a regional title. From the girl who told her brother to run to the girl who ran for herself. Flint still parked in the same spot every time he went to that Walmart. Same row, third from the garden center. Near the spot where a boy had crouched behind his tire on a Saturday afternoon and said the words that changed the direction of the day, and it turned out the direction of several lives. He didn't park there because he was looking for another kid. He wasn't standing guard. He wasn't running surveillance. He parked there because the spot reminded him of something he didn't want to forget. The biggest thing in a parking lot isn't always a truck. Sometimes it's the moment you decide to believe a scared kid instead of walking past. Sometimes it's a dollar notebook in a school locker. Sometimes it's a 14-year-old girl who told her brother to run and then stayed behind, not because she was brave in the way that movies show bravery with music and slow motion and the guarantee of a happy ending, but brave in the way that real people are brave, quietly, painfully, without an audience, without a plan for themselves, with nothing but the decision that someone smaller was going to be safe no matter what it cost. Marin Braden was fast now, that's all, just fast. And that was enough. That was everything.